Yeah.
David Allen.
Just get underway.
Yep. Hey, look, we'll make a start. I'm mindful of time and being respectful to our presenters. This next one is water consumption, installing restrictors on rural properties, which is probably quite a favourite one for me. So I'll hand you over to the staff here. We've got sort of an A and B here with a break in the middle. We'll just see how we go. We might just be able to kick on and get through it all. But we'll see how we're going. Thanks very much.
Cool. Thank you, Chair Olsen, councillors, Mayor Burney. Essentially, first of all, I just want to introduce Justine Moore, who has been with council for 4 years. A lot of you would have met Justine with other presentations, but a few may not. As a policy advisor that works for community infrastructure, Justine is a subject matter expert on a lot of things, so more so than some of those that have been in that business for some time, given her background in investigation and work through a lot of these different parts of our operation delivery. The purpose of the presentation today is to give elected members a good understanding of the problem, and we're seeking to inform you of the current situation, and then seek guidance on the next steps, and that's where the two parts come in. But essentially, over the last few years, council have successfully taken steps to reduce the amount of water that is wasted to protect what is a valuable resource through installing the water meters. That has had the desired effect and had some significant benefits for our community. Now that the water meter installation project is nearing its completion, it has helped to identify where there continues to be high levels of water consumption and where our bylaws have not necessarily been enforced consistently or been applied across the district. Today we are here to get your guidance and confirm our next steps in relation to the installation of restrictors for rural properties connected to the council network, and we're also going to talk about some complex properties as well in amongst that. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Justine to move into the information side of it.
Okay, so just to go through the template, part A is the question that we are asking with this one is, do you understand the situation around rural water restrictors? And for part B, what actions would you support officers undertaking to enforce the current regulations in relation to rural water restrictors? So as we move through, part A will be focused on no, and part B will be focused on do. So over the last few years, a program of work has been undertaken to ensure that drinking water is protected and used predominantly for drinking or human consumption. Part of this is driven because our drinking water is such a precious resource and it requires significant effort and cost to treat. This program of work is in line with our resource consent requirements to manage the overall demand for treated drinking water, and it also supports future growth by ensuring that there is enough water to supply new developments. So the program of work that's been undertaken has included the installation of water meters, although if we solely rely on water meters, we will still not be compliant from an SSP perspective. Repairing water leaks, so we've been able to identify a number of water leaks in both the public network and on private property, which has significantly reduced the amount of water being lost. We've also been working to refine the water billing process, working closely with the finance team, and this has included reviewing the letters that are sent when a leak is identified or a continuous flow of water is identified at a property, and also updating some of our back-end processes. We've also been working to address how to treat complex properties in a fairer way, which I will address in the next slide. And lastly, we've been clarifying the water conservation measures process, and that includes how we communicate and work within the water restriction settings. So complex properties are those where there is more than one dwelling or property connected to 1 metre. So while commonly complex properties can be those on a cross-lease title, there are also a number of other situations where that can occur, and it's more effective to consider these types of properties together. While we do not have an exact number of properties that this impacts, it's likely that there is around 150 metres that have been marked as non-billable in our system, and therefore a realistic estimate. So this is 150 metres that would have more than one property attached to them. And so a realistic estimate is between 300 to 400 properties that are affected by this. So complex properties are currently marked as non-billable in our system, and what this means is that when their usage exceeds 91 cubic metres a quarter, they're not being billed for the excess usage in the same way that others are. It does raise questions surrounding equity and fairness. So what we are proposing is that from the 1st of July, we will bill these properties for excess water usage, and the bill will be split equally between the connected properties unless an exemption exists. So for example, if there is something on a title that says that how things should be split differently, or if there's a legal agreement that can be provided to us, we'll just split it equally unless we get something else.
So that's where the property's on separate titles. But if it's something like a unit title development, then it's ultimately for the body corporate to work out the methodology, right? So this is only where the meters at the gate, and there's no other obvious way, or no coordinating body to do it, right? Okay.
So just to clarify, so if I've got a meter and there's multiple others there, then the measure we're applying is more than the 90 cubic metres per unit. So if there were 3 offshoots, it'd be anything above 270 cubic metres in that particular time period that we're taking into account. Do we know how many of those would actually be over and above the 100, or is 100 the ones where we have identified they're above the billing threshold?
There are only a very small number that would actually get a bill. We haven't gone through and worked out the exact number, but the situation that has arisen, that's one of the reasons that this came to us, is where, particularly where there is a rental property on a cross lease, and perhaps a landlord that is not living within the district, and they are just allowing the leak to remain. And so there's no fixing of the leak, and then there's no way that we can kind of force them to repair it without going more extreme into enforcement measures and sending warnings and things like that. So this is where it's come to our attention, and we just want to make sure that everyone is being treated fairly. So for example, where you might have 1 metre in a cross lease section that has 3 units, we would times 91 by 3, and anything above that would be split equally between the 3. And usually it would only be if there's a leak, because often, particularly a cross lease section, would only have there's usually less water consumption for those properties anyway.
Can I ask, what communication has been given in terms of those that will be affected so far before any decisions have been made?
The reason we've got a proposed start date of the 1st of July is that we would include communications about this as part of the annual plan and fees and charges conversation that happens. So when our community is looking for information about amounts that are going to change, we would include it there. So that's the plan of where it would be included.
So under our bylaw, these properties are in theory liable, but it's actually just a practical thing that in our billing system we're not, as a practice, we're not billing them. So they're already liable for it. So it's not really changing the rules, but it's about, so the communication will be about saying this is now going to be enforced or implemented rather than
and this is how we're going to apply charges.
That was my concern, is that it just doesn't come out of the blue and they're like, oh, hang on, what's all this about? Which obviously for us is a negative, will be negative feedback, but how do we ensure that they're aware of this and it's not suddenly landing in their letterbox and they're like, what?
Can I know you sort of were just getting to that last box, but just for my lay knowledge to make sure I understand, can you expand on what private infrastructure, so that you've got a property where you're going to suddenly go from 1 metre to 3 metres? Is that what you're talking about? So you'll never do that. So, and what infrastructure would?
So, in an ideal world, each individual property would have a separate meter. So, if you've got a cross-lease section and there are 3 units, there would be 3 separate meters for it. We haven't done that. We've put 1 meter for the title for that, unless there's been some communication. So what we are saying with this is, if some council would support a meter being put in at the boundary, so that's where council's responsibility ends in terms of the assets. But anything beyond the boundary, so for example, if new laterals had to be put in, so we've got drains that have to be dug and plumbing, that is on the property owners. In particular, in terms of cross-lease titles, it can get quite complex because you need all owners to agree, and so that's why council's responsibility would be to the boundary, where we would, in an ideal world, have multiple meters so that you can tell where a leak is, you can sort the billing out easily. However, we understand that that's not necessarily going to happen, which is why we want an alternative way to.
But we would be able to possibly put that into a bylaw for future development, so where there's cross-lease sections, or into development to lead into that.
It is very rare now for a new development to have that title type, and it's much more common for a development to have 1 property, 1 meter. The exception is some of these granny flats and things like that, but while they're on 1 title, that's almost the responsibility of the owner of the property to work out, perhaps putting in a child meter or something like that, to be able to split those bills.
But we also don't want, I wouldn't want to be in a position without further discussion and debate to be advocating for a position where it's a one-size-fits-all, because we have rural subdivisions where you might have 20 new lots, and it simply doesn't make sense to have 20 separate lines from the gate going to all these properties. Like, it absolutely makes sense to have 1 line in and then branching off, because it's just unnecessary cost and complexity. And our bylaw allows for that approval to be given by council, and so this is a better solution.
I think totally agree with that. However, if a property owner does choose to put the meters in, then that's entirely up to them. Yeah.
Okay, so moving on from complex properties, moving on to part A of the workshop today, which is looking at rural water restrictors and what's the current situation and how do we get here. So first of all, what is a restrictor? So a restrictor is a small device that's installed at the property boundary within the water pipe to reduce the flow of water to a trickle feed. When you look at this diagram here, is the little pink bit in it. The overall consumption, this does keep the overall consumption to below 1,000 litres a day. So if a restrictor is installed, the pressure significantly reduces to a property, and it would usually require the use of a water tank and other infrastructure for the pressure to be high enough for everyday use. So there are various sizes of restrictor that are used depending on the individual situation, and council has actually required that rural properties connected to the council network have a restrictor installed since at least 2008, and it's possibly prior to this as well. So this is not a new regulation that was introduced with the last bylaw. It's been in place for quite a long time. So these restrictors are outlined, or the use of these restrictors are outlined in the current local waters combined bylaw. But like I said, these are not new regulations. Practically, this requirement has not been consistently enforced, recorded in our system, or required when a house has been built. So you can see that C2 is the section of the bylaw that deals with the installation of restrictors. So why are these regulations important? We are at the limit for abstraction from the Ohau River based on Horizons 1 plan, and by ensuring that treated water is only used for human water consumption and not for watering stock or horticulture, we can protect the resource that we have. It also ensures that we have enough drinking water to support future developments, and in addition, some property owners to date have complied with these regulations, and it's another one where it can be a bit unfair if we're not consistently applying these. So looking at the current state, we know that there's been inconsistency between which properties have been required to install restrictors and which ones haven't. Other properties have also had their restrictors removed. So a common reason for this was if a water tank was empty during summer and needed to be filled quickly, the restrictor would be taken out, and then it may not have been put back in again. We also know that the information held in our council systems can be incorrect, and this has actually compounded the issue that we have. So as the new smart meters were installed, the information about whether there was a restrictor there at the time was erratically captured, if at all. And within our systems, we have information stored in multiple places. So, for example, Authority 1 system shows 9 properties with a restrictor. We know this is incorrect because when we look at a different system and we search on restrictor size, it shows 207 restrictors. So we are estimating that there's probably around 500 properties that are affected by this, and so we just simply don't know how many of these properties have a restrictor or not.
I just want to, it's worth noting though, in the past restrictors have been removed. It is very, very rare that we would remove a restrictor today. If people have a swimming pool, we tell them that they need to tanker in the water. If people have an empty tank, we would tell them to tanker in the water. In the past, council used to take restrictors out for those sorts of things, but we won't anymore.
Just a quick question. Can owners, though I know they shouldn't, but can they physically take the restrictor off themselves?
Yes.
It would require them to get access into the drinking water pipe, which would require you to know what you were doing, but it's about a 5-minute job, is what I've been told by somebody who knows what they're doing to be able to install or take out a restrictor.
Can you just talk to me about what happens when there's a change of, as we've had with district plan changes, where there's a change of zoning. So I'm probably talking about fringe live-in at the moment, and probably parts of Foxton, where there's a change from this type of property to residential. And so, is there do we go through and change? Is there a program, or is it all kind of reactive and it's sort of ad hoc as to whether it gets changed?
Can I come back to your question as we go through, because I think part of it will be answered as we move through. So just back onto the current state, we do know that there are properties where one property will have a restrictor and then their neighbour will not. So we do know that that's happened. And to actually count the number of restrictors that are there to get an accurate picture, we would now need to physically go and look and see to get the information that we need. And so before we move on too far, we'll cover off a little bit about pipe size, which will become a bit more relevant as we move through. So there's two main factors that affect the flow of water that you receive from your tap, and that is pressure and pipe size. So HDC maintains a consistent pressure across our network by using pressure relief valves. This assists in prolonging the life of the assets as well as reducing leaks. So due to the consistent pressure, only a certain volume of water can travel through the pipe depending on its size. If a number of properties along a road are supplied via a 40mm pipe without restrictors, if they all turn their taps on at the same time, so say it's 8 o'clock in the morning, everyone's decided to have a shower, then the house at the very end of the road is unlikely to have any water or enough pressure to actually be able to use it properly. So the majority of the urban network has at least 100mm pipe size. However, the rural network can actually vary from 35mm to 100mm. So the next few slides as we go through are actually going to show our public drinking water network and outline what this actually means for each specific area. So the first slide we've got here is of live-in. So as you can see in the centre, there would be 100mm pipe there, at least 100mm pipe. But as we move around into the rural areas, you can see Arapaipai Road has a 50mm pipe that doesn't actually run the full length of the road. Gladstone Road has a 50mm pipe as well, and we have, our data shows that at least 20 of the 139 properties would have a restrictor installed. The Queen Street Estate has a 25mm pipe, and there's only restrictors around the Wakefield Street intersection that we can see in the system. And then if you look at Hokio Beach and Hokio Sands, at the intersection, the network reduces from 100mm down to 50 or 40 at that point. Down there. So moving on to Shannon. Most rural streets have less than 100mm pipe, and there's no known restrictors there. It's in terms of pressure, there are live-in is the area that is most affected by this. It's less likely that if we removed all of the restrictors in these other areas, that it would actually affect the pressure too much, because of there are less houses connected or less properties connected to the network, therefore they can cope with a smaller pipe size. So next we've got Tokomaru. So again, most of the network is 100mm in Tokomaru. There is 150mm here. That is the main line from the treatment plant to the town. That's why it's higher. And then there's a short area from State Highway 57 to the school that's 50mm, and another small area that is 40mm. So Foxton, again, most of this area is 100 millimetres. Donnelly Road is 50 millimetres, and then you've got the end of Purcell Street, which is 30 there. And lastly, we've got Foxton Beach, which shows that most of the network has 100 millimetres or greater, but there are some short sections with smaller pipe sizes. So coming back to your question, Councillor Jennings, what you can see is as we start planning for growth, part of it is that we need to be looking at the pipe size that is supporting these areas. And as we start thinking about an area and looking at a development, we would need to be looking at, is there capacity with current water network, and then also are the pipe sizes appropriate to be able to support nobody having restrictors. So that's where, as we plan for development, we do need to be thinking about, do we need to upgrade the water pipes to support it? Do you have anything to say about?
And a lot of that would be done as part of the planning process anyway, so and would give us the ability to remove restrictors if it was rezoned.
So this is the end of part A of the workshop. So we've covered off why we are looking at reducing overall water consumption, what a restrictor is, the current situation and how we got to this point, and we've given an overview of the district focused on the rural areas and the pipe sizes that are supported, that support them. So we're interested at this point in whether you have any comments or questions before we move on to part B, which is focused on what actions we will take.
So, given the graphics and the pipe sizing, obviously there's a preference in urban areas to go to 100 millimetres. So my assumption is, given a vast majority of our denser urban areas are already at 100, it's common practice for us to use 100 millimetre piping when we're doing our renewal work, pipe replacement work.
Yeah, that's right. And I guess to put some perspective around this, and a lot of our issues from a rural perspective when it comes to restrictors or non-restricted rural is where, not so much if it's a lifestyle block, a 400 square metre lifestyle block, that is just a normal household. It's where it's attached to a farm or something like that, or a bigger, where they've also got those, our human consumption water, our drinking water, connected to troughs and things like that. And often that's where we run into problems, is when troughs have leaks and things like that, and then we have to chase the water on that side of it, because essentially, to Justine's point, it's almost like producing Coca-Cola. Our water treatment costs us a lot of money, and we're treating it for human consumption. And so if people are using our water to water stock and things like that, it can become quite an expensive commodity.
So, can I just play devil's advocate for a second with you? Because I get that argument, but then in a urban setting, we have no control of how people use that water to fill up a pool or a spa or whatever, versus how someone uses it in the rural zone. So I would have thought that while we're conscious of how water might be used, our primary objective for the use of restrictors seems to be about pressure management, where pipe size means there is a risk to properties, the supply to rural properties. And so is it fair to say that that's the primary driver? Because if we were to upgrade a pipe in a rural area to 100 millimetres, then surely the same standard applies as it does in an urban context, or is it that there's greater risk of leakage and therefore wastage in a rural setting? I mean, I'm just trying to compare apples with apples.
You can also find that if we allowed, we do have a number of rural properties who have very high water consumption and they just pay their bill.
Yeah.
So they would have thousands of dollars of a bill. The difficulty that we have with that is that will prevent, if that happened in enough places, it would prevent growth being able to happen. We would have to upgrade water treatment plants. We would have to
couldn't we increase the price though for those that over a certain amount? Demand value?
We could.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, and I guess one of the more complex things comes for us, and it again comes from a rural setting. In an urban setting, you have the water meter and then the connection to the house.
Yeah.
In a rural setting, you have the connection to the house and then all the other connections that are put on to greater parts of the farm. So it does get a lot harder for it to be managed. And generally, when we do get water loss rurally, it is large quantities.
So that leads into my question, and it was coming off of Sam's comments, was that we are talking that none of these properties, whether they have a restrictor fitted or not fitted, that none of them have a water meter on. So we actually don't know what their usage is.
They do have water meters installed. So this is the project that's been ongoing, where every property connected to the public network will have a water meter.
I'm not sure if this is the right forum for it, but could we look at actually decommissioning some of those rural water schemes if those people didn't want them? Because I always find it really bizarre that you would have a low pressure feed into your house where you'd have a water tank, a pump and everything else, when you could just divert your water from your roof and not have the bill.
We have had people investigate that as an option, but having a connection to the town water supply is quite a valuable, saleable thing when it comes to selling your property. And when we say that, because some of them will say, "Oh, we'll just turn it off," we go, "No, it doesn't work like that. You're paying for the connection." So essentially, it's very few people will take that option.
And so mine's just a clarifying question as well. So all of these properties have meters and they're having a really high consumption, so they're getting a really big water bill that they're happily paying. Is that what you're saying?
Some properties. Some properties do have the infrastructure, so they will have a tank, they're using it, their roof is, they're getting water off their roof, going into a tank, and they're using the trickle feed to top up their tank as needed. At that 1,000 litres a day, particularly in summer, if we ended up in a situation where someone's water tank was running low, that would keep your house, that would be enough water to run a household. Yeah, does that?
Yeah, and of the 500 that don't have restrictors, it's very small percentage that are using excess water.
Just like context, so like on a dairy farm, for example, our water pipes coming off the mains would be like 32 to 40 mils. A cow on average would drink between 114 to say 190 litres a day. Like some of this water consumption must be massive if people have got a farm or livestock's hooked up to a town water scheme. So, like you can sort of see like those sort of numbers, like it's massive consumption, and it actually, just to sort of what Morgan's sort of saying, it would be interesting just to see on the fringes whether that is a conversation we could have, because it's massive. And I mean, going back to like Tokomaru's water, that the need or the cost of an upgrade on infrastructure, you could actually put a tank and a pump in every section within Tokomaru cheaper than what you would if you were upgrading the whole system.
But coming back to where we started, this is actually about managing our existing resource consent from Oho. So if you've got a farm that's doing massive drawdown, yes, they're paying the bill, but it actually impacts our growth significantly. So there needs to be some mechanism or way to say, please stop doing it.
Yeah, and to support that, it comes back to the fact that there was a bylaw that was introduced for a reason, and we're not applying it to everybody.
I'm thinking if we're going to have a serious look at this, then I think we should give people the option to opt out. I mean, if they're going to provide their own water in and their own water out, and just because they've got a connection there they don't want to use, doesn't mean we should tax them for it. But give them the option. I mean, that seems fair and equitable to me. And a question I've got, though, is that where does this fit in with getting handed over to Central District's water? Yeah.
The opt-out issue, as long as everyone's clear, the opt-out isn't turn off the tap, it's remove the meter and remove the source. You can't have your cake and eat it too, because essentially if they opt out, we stop paying them. They stop paying rates for it. Yeah. And from a Central District's water perspective, essentially they will take this problem over in 12 months, 12 to 18 months.
Kia ora. Just wanting to clarify, so is this kōrero today about the consistency of some that are connected, some aren't? Like, where's the consistency? If I'm paying for it, if I've got a restrictor on my property, but my neighbour hasn't, and they've got the money to pay the bill, like, does that make it okay?
It's 100% about that. It's 100% around the consistency. Do we apply the bylaw as it stands? Do we allow it to sit as it stands? Essentially, we need a way forward because we are offering a water source to some rural people who are choosing to use it for a lot of different things, and if we accept that it's okay for them to pay for it, then that's okay.
So that's my question. It's about compliance and it's about enforcement. Is that right? And my question is, why not? If we've gone to the effort of having a bylaw, it seems confusing that we're not applying it consistently, and it seems to be sending the wrong message. So why are we not enforcing it? What's been the barrier to that?
I think over time a number have slipped through. No longer are they slipping through from a development perspective. So it's a little bit of a clean-up in that respect. Too, when the bylaw was introduced, there might have been some existing houses that were already not set up with restrictors. So for us, since we've put the water meters in, we're going through everything we possibly can to, and it's a little bit like the water complexities issue, make sure things are fair for everyone on a level footing. And but I think the questions raised around, if we do this, it will possibly create a little bit of turmoil, or possibly not, but essentially, if we're all on the same page, then we'll move forward with it. But to Councillor Barker's point, give them the option to opt out if they want to. From a rural, if they're a rural zone, they don't have to receive our water, and we can remove the meter. But also that they open eyes wide open. And to Councillor Olsen's point around the pump and the tank, it's going to cost $6,000 to $10,000 for us to put a restrictor in. So if we've got 500 properties, they need to understand the consequence of that.
And would you say this is quite an important step in terms of us being ready and certain for our new developments coming through, that we are managing our water really well to be able to cope and accommodate what we're hoping will be a growth within the area?
And also being very consistent for our developers about what they need to do. Do they need to put water tanks in? Do they not? So making sure that that infrastructure is able to be put in at the start.
If I could just add one more thing too, is the water metering project has been hugely successful. Before the water metering project, we have a consent of 13 cube per day out of the river, Ohio River. Before the metering project, we're at times over summer at 12. Since the metering project, we're fluctuating between 8 and 9, which essentially is 8 to 10 years of growth. Now, if we continue to, on its own, still isn't enough for us to meet our SSP around water conservation and water management. So we're trying to tick off every box and close everything off. But essentially, under our current population, we could be around 6 or 7 in respect to cube coming out of that river a day, which, without lifting a finger, provides us with a number of years of growth without spending any more money.
Rob, well, in table, I guess I'm a little bit alarmed to hear some of my urban-based councillor commentary that seems to suggest, well, yes, we've got a bylaw that has a rule, but there seems to be a sentiment being expressed that it's okay to demand manage rural, but there's seem to be no corresponding expectation in an urban context. So if we're talking about fairness, then we should be talking about demand and utilisation of water at a broader level, not just targeting rural properties. I get that, and your point, Rob, is an important one, is that if there are specific properties that are using more than their fair share, then it either needs to be a call about that they've got to pay for that privilege, or there's got to be an assessment about reasonableness. But that reasonableness, that approach around reasonableness needs to apply broadly across the district, not just target rural properties. So that's what, if we need to relook at the bylaw, then happy to do that. But I'm a bit uncomfortable with just some of the sentiment that's being expressed, that kind of this is a that's a focus on just rural. But I get why, because
and just for clarification, Sam, that if it has to go across the board, because water is our most important resource, and if we don't start looking after it, we won't have to worry about growth, because we won't have the water to sustain us. So if that means all of Horowhenua has to go through an assessment, then let's do it. Better to do it now than in 10 years to say, oh, remember those councillors around the table when they talked about it and they did nothing.
Yeah, I back up. I'm sorry that you took my comments interpreted that way. It was to be across the board. It was not targeting rural. I have lived in Horowhenua District Council in Sanson, where we've had trickle feed, so I know all the things that need to happen there. So, but to me, I was taking it as across the board. I'm sorry, I didn't clarify that as just rural. So calm down, Sam.
Perhaps our esteemed policy officers can give us a bit of an example of the water consumption differences between urban as opposed to rural, and is there a big difference if you are living in a rural environment? And would you consider I suppose, looking at an urban household, would they realistically use more than rural or not?
If you are comparing a like-for-like household, urban and rural, there's unlikely to be a significant difference unless the rural property is also using it to water extensive gardens or feedstock. So in terms of the actual household itself, if you've got a household of 5 people rural and 5 people urban, there would not be a significant difference between the two. Swimming pools would not necessarily just be rural. So
Sorry, our average consumption in our district is around 285 litres per person, which in European standards is extremely high.
One of the things I find an alarming prospect here as it's come out is that there's possibility that dairy cows are consuming our fluoride-laced water.
Never drinking the milk.
They have very good teeth, Councillor Barker. But I think Councillor Jennings raises a really good point, and I understand that side of the argument, but that's more around whether our bylaw is fit for purpose.
I would also add a piece in here too. If we had less network in the rural communities, I know some of the businesses and farms would have to do it, but say for more like your lifestyle community, the less people that are on the network, the more probably resilience you have. If your people are looking after their own water consumption. When I look at my house, I had to replace a pump the other day, and it was $1,250 just for a pump, and it lasted about 4 years. So if you're on a trickle fee and you're already investing in that infrastructure, to put an extra tank in, it would only be a few years of water costs to have that and not be on the network, and then it would be one less thing for council and water entity to worry about.
in relation to rural properties being connected, people can currently opt out of being connected. It would involve them having everything removed. They do pay a half water rate to have the supply go through.
So this is going to a new water entity, but how do our bylaws apply to the new water entity? And how does that, if we want to update the bylaw and say anyone urban, anyone rural connected to the scheme can only use this much water, and after that we charge them 10 times the price. How do our bylaws, what happens?
That's one area that council's in control in respect to the fact that the bylaws, the entities have to work to those bylaws, and also, but moving forward, it would be more around the council's working with the entity on changing the bylaws, because there will need to be changes in the future.
So the bylaws are required to be reviewed so they have to be reviewed before 2027, I believe. And then a plan has to be put in place about what to do within the 2 years following that. The bylaws will be reviewed in conjunction with Palmerston North and Rangitiki's bylaws, because where we can put consistency in, it would make sense. But the bylaw will still need to be approved and adopted by this council for this area going forward, regardless of the water entity. We can have bespokeness where we would need it.
Hey, look, I'm mindful of time. It's 11:30. We've got another half an hour. Is that enough direction from part A? Maybe we flick over to part B, if that's all right.
Officers in Part B have developed 3 options, and this is what we really want to seek your feedback on today, and getting feedback as well on what you think we should specifically be focusing on going forward. So option A that we have here is where we enforce the current regulations for all rural properties, and the technical wording from the bylaw also includes large lot residential. The pros of this option is that it would be fair across the board for everybody. It would mean that we are consistently applying the regulations. we would have appropriate water pressure for all properties, and it would help prevent drinking water being used to water stock or to support horticulture. The cons of this are that some people would need to install private infrastructure if they don't have it now. So if they would need tanks and pumps and whatever else they would need. The cost would vary depending on individual situations, but we've got an indicative estimate of 5 to 10,000, and that's based on needing a pump and a tank. It's also, with the cons, is it's not actually necessary for some of the areas that were shown earlier, like so around Tukumaru and those kinds of things, to support the water pressure. Next option. So option B is where we would enforce the regulations on a case-by-case basis. So the pro for this is that less council resource would be required, but would still require resource. The cons of this is that some people would still need to install the private infrastructure. Again, the costs would vary depending on what people are doing. It is less equitable, and it is less transparent for people about who is required to comply. And in particular, there would be a question over new developments. Do we require a restrictor to be installed going forward or not? It is a question that regularly comes up with our development team. So, and then option C would be removing the water restrictors for everybody. The pros of this is that there would be no council resources required to administer or regulate this. There would be no requirement for properties to install or maintain private infrastructure. However, our water pipes might need to be upgraded to ensure that there is appropriate water pressure for people. The cost of this might be prohibitive, and the water pressure, if we have an upgraded area, may be significantly reduced. It may also allow the drinking water to be used for watering stock in horticulture, and then there would be reduced ability to support growth, including new developments. We would also need to change the bylaw for this option. So those are the three options that we have been considering, and today we're after your guidance on which option we should be taking, specifically looking at whether these rules are enforced. There was a discussion last year when the bylaw was adopted that council did not want drinking water used for water stock or horticulture. However, we are wanting to confirm that this is still the current thinking, and also wanting to note that if option A was supported, we would need to operationally develop a clear plan, including how to communicate this requirement to the community and a timeline for when properties would need to be complying by.
Yeah, that was my question is, can we look at a staged approach in terms of the cost of living crisis and the issues facing our community at the moment? Either one of those, if we chose A or B, would perhaps, how can we keep in mind the financial affordability for our community, and whether that could be something that we could do over a period of time rather than just lump it onto them in one go, if we're looking at the equitable growth aspect?
That is certainly something that we can consider when the operational plan is developed, and it is something that we as officers have been very aware of.
Okay, now we're going to flip onto the other side, because I think they were very, very good points, and I support what Councillor Mitchell-Katab said. Is there the ability within the council's officer time budget and compliance costs currently, or is this something, if we were to take option A, we would actually need to make sure we put into our long-term plan, because I would expect that to be a reasonably significant cost.
No, this is something that we would mould into our existing budgets, operating budgets.
The cost of a restrictor is minimal, and 5 minutes of time to install it it's more the cost that would go onto the community if they didn't have the infrastructure installed.
I'm thinking that as part of this, it would be fair and equitable to actually put into play the option to opt completely out as part of this, not just before it ends up in CDC. Which, when that happens, I doubt that will be possible to do that with people. But I think that fairness and equity wise, if just because you've got a water line that we own going past your gate and you don't want to have a bar of it, why should you actually have to pay for it if you're never going to use it? So that's the thing I'm getting at. The option to opt out completely should be there for those that want to.
Do you want to answer that or no? Did you want to need to answer that or not?
That's something we'd have to look at there, and understand the point. It's more around the privilege of having a pipe go past your front gate.
Are you able to flip back to slide option A, please? So on slide B, I think it talked about the cost of enforcement. Was that right? I just wondered what are the, because it strikes me that this isn't a financial affordability issue at one level because people are willing to pay their water bills. Have I interpreted that correctly? Yes.
For some of them.
For some of them.
Yeah.
Okay.
And generally, if Councillor Olsen might correct me here, but farmers are pretty wealthy.
And okay, good to know. But people, much like in the urban area, if somebody doesn't want a big water bill for their household of 5 people, they modify their water use. Yeah. So my question is, what the pros there, however we apply this bylaw, equitable and fair, consistent application of regulations, water pressure will be appropriate for all properties and will help prevent what we see as drinking water being used for stock and horticulture use. So the restrictors are really inexpensive to apply and wouldn't create a huge financial burden in the operational budget of council. And then we know they're easy to put in and they're easy to take out. What's the ongoing enforcement cost, I think, that Councillor Fox was referring to? Because if we were going to go with something, I'd have to say out of the starting blocks, my preference would be option A rather than option B, because I wouldn't want neighbours to be pitted against each other or dobbing. You know, like I would hate to set up that environment in our district. I think it probably already happens, but what's the ongoing enforcement cost and how would this be managed?
There's no ongoing enforcement cost because with a restrictor you can get no more than 1,000 litres a day. So it would be more around them having tanks. You can run a restrictor off a 5,000 litre tank, or to the previous point, you can put in 3 10,000 litre tanks and fill those tanks up with your 1,000 litres a day, or run off your roofs and not even need connection. So.
Is there any reason why we can't look at A, but have the case-by-case basis underneath that, in terms of the case-by-case basis would include the timeline underneath option A. So places like Tokomaru would not have to do that immediately, but that would be something that would be phased in a time period moving forward, so that we are a little bit more accommodating to the community. And I do taitoko Mike's point that, you know, democracy, we need to ensure that people can have an option. So perhaps we could, if we could ask if you could possibly have a look at that potential option of opting out and what that might look like in terms of cons, pros, the risks, and how that would fit into one of the options.
If we, they can opt out now, but it only removes half the charge. If we want to remove the whole charge, we need to go for a bylaw change.
Rob, you've said, team, you've said 500 properties affected. So these are 500 properties that either have restrictors or ought to have restrictors. Is that correct? So based on that, and you said it's a tiny percentage that are kind of the problem. So, are we talking 20 properties? Are we talking 50 properties? Are we talking 100 properties? Because I'd be quite keen to see like what is actually the quantity that the 20 top users are using versus the 20 top users in an urban setting. Because it's reasonable for us to say we don't want potable water used for stock and horticulture. But in the same breath, we can't say, oh, well, then it's acceptable to have no limits on people watering their gardens, washing their cars, doing whatever they want to do, washing their house. You know what I mean? There's got to be a principled basis to control the quantity. And so the question is, would there be an ability? Do the restrictors come in a one size fits all of 1,000 litres? Can you get 2,000 litres or 5,000 litres, or conceivably, is there a middle ground that could be taken? Because I think that the objective is to control the massive excessive users, is I think what we're focusing on. But I'm just trying to get a sense of the quantity of what we would consider excessive, and is there a pragmatic solution here?
Yeah, and I guess they're possibly missing option D, which is status quo. But I guess we're more asking the question today, is it reasonable for the majority of people to have restrictors and for a few not to have restrictors? Because essentially that's the flip side to the question you're asking, in respect to the fact that we're more, I think we're more here today around fair and equitable. Can you rephrase it, sorry, Councillor Jennings, to what you...
So what I'm saying is the problem appears to be that the problem that we're trying to solve is that we've identified, you guys have identified, that there are people who ought to be in the rural space, who ought to have restrictors on their meter, and who don't, who are excessively consuming water. Because there'll be people in an urban context and in the rural context that use more than their 1,000 litres a day and are willing to pay for it. But it's about drawing a line in the sand around where does the line sit in terms of a reasonable use of water? When do we view as a council it becomes excessive, irrespective of what the water's used for?
Current measurement we have is 1,000 litres a day. Isn't that, from a human consumption perspective, whether you fill a swimming pool or spa pool or anything, that's not human consumption, and we have a bylaw that allows people to do that if they pay for the water. The same question then goes to rural properties. Is it fair that they then can use that water for stock? So I'm not sure officers can draw that line in the sand, what's fair and reasonable, because what we have is a national standard for human consumption. I'm not sure it's fair on officers to then come up with something that's fair and reasonable for other people.
Yeah, similar to Sam, I want to understand the numbers a little bit more. I want to understand, of those numbers, are they a farming or are they a household that happens to be living rurally, to understand income streams for potentially each of those properties. While I'm open to an opt-out, I'm cautious around the precedents that sets, not only for water services but for any other services that council actually provides. So I'm less in favour of that, and I quite like what seems raised, which is looking at the problem we're trying to solve, target those high users and see if we can work within the existing policy and frameworks to find solutions to encourage them along, whether it is they have a slightly bigger, what's it called, trap thing, restrictor, there we go, or not. So, yeah, that's probably where I'd more sitting. I'm really uncomfortable going out and saying 5 to 10k, fix it. But part of that is I'm also aware that the farming community have had a really good year. And so if you were going to do it, now's a really good time to do it. But go have another Red Bill, Councillor Jenny.
Anyway, going further on from Councillor Jennings.
One of the problems we have is, sorry to interrupt, Councillor Fox, is these guys, these properties aren't all farmers. That needs to be understood, but they are zoned rural by default. But when I thought about this more holistically from a council perspective, about 15 years ago we had a large number of properties in urban that didn't have soap pits, and council made the decision to ensure that every house in Levin had soap pits at great expense then, probably not what was paid looks like now, to those properties, install them. There was no if, buts or maybes. They had to install them in line with the bylaw, and there's not too much different with this question. We can go off and research it and do all that, which would take considerable amount of officer time because we don't even know the exact number. But I keep coming back to the fact that we have a bylaw. You want us to enforce it, or do you not?
Thank you for that. And I will go and be triggered back by Councillor Jennings and the fact that what I haven't heard in any of the other councillors' statement, but I'm assuming it's part of the bylaw, and I'll admit I haven't read it, is that every year, come December, we have water restrictions. And Foxton Beach almost automatically goes straight to level 2. Now, if they're not telling me what I can do in an urban setting of how I can use my water, but rural properties not necessarily the same. So I'm sorry, but my vote will go for option 1.
Basically, I think it's all in or no one in terms of fairness to whatever we do here. But I'd just like to test, is there an appetite at all for a bylaw change to provide an opt-out option?
I'm happy to explore it.
Doesn't the bylaw have to be updated next year? This year? When was it? Oh, I just did it last year. Okay. Oh, true.
So, Rob, I just want to paint the scenario so I'm absolutely clear and so that everyone around the table is clear. Because, people are talking about fairness, but they're not getting it. Because if you're in East Levin or in Ohau right now on trickle feed and you've got a restrictor, you're a family of 5, so based on your numbers, 285 litres per person use average per day. So that family of 5, if they wanted to use their 285 litres on average per person per day, that's 1425 litres per day. If we enforce a restrictor, we're limiting those people to 1,000 litres per day, even though they might be willing to pay for the extra 425 litres. Urban setting, they can use with wild abandon their 1425 litres a day and pay for it. Where is the fairness if you have those two different scenarios? The problem we are trying to solve surely has to be limited to the excessive, unreasonable use. And it is a policy decision of this governing table to decide what is reasonable and what is not. But if you're talking about equitable and fair, and sorry, Nola, that your commentary pretty much indicates a pretty clear, locked-in view. then yeah, look, I have really get ready for a fight from the rural sector as well. So get ready for it.
Just a few things. Just in response to that, I think we've got to be careful about making assumptions. Like, it's not necessarily that people in the urban environment are just going to be using willy-nilly water, and we do understand that that water is going to be we have to pay for it. So there'll be there'll be a lot of water consumption, and people will be very careful about how much water that they're using. And I think it is really valuable to look at our environment and look at the strategies that we as a council have agreed upon, which is future fit, which is fiscally responsible, which is going for growth, and this fits underneath that really well. Keeping in mind that we do need to understand the economic reality that this will put in place for those people that you do mention, Sam. And so looking at ways that we can perhaps manage that and support that while keeping it equitable and fair, while keeping to what we have discussed are our three options moving forward, and importantly looking at how we will accommodate our progress when we're looking at Plan 6A, when we're looking at Tara Ika, when we're looking at those growth areas. I do want to harp on about the environment, which hasn't really been mentioned at this point, because we have a responsibility to our environment in a climate changing world where we have climate events and weather events happening more frequently, and we need to keep that in mind as we're moving forward with this to manage that. Otherwise we will find ourselves in difficulty. So I do support option A with a few amendments in terms of how we can stage this, how we can support those who need some, who have financial concerns, and looking at options, as many options as we can for people, while supporting the bylaw that was put into place and keeping in mind what I've just spoken about.
Thank you, Councillor. I did just have one other point to make about option C, if we could put that one up. If we have the ability now that if there is a leak or if somebody's consumption is too high and they either don't have the ability or they decide not to repair a leak and we need to go down an enforcement path with them, we have some options within that. One option is, and this is for everyone, this is not just for rural properties, if there is a leak that is not being repaired, we have an option to put a restrictor on that property to reduce the water consumption down to 1,000 litres per day. Or we have the option to go in and basically do the repair ourselves after a process and then pass that cost back on to the property owner. So if we did look at option C, where we removed water restrictors for all, this would be removing standard water restrictors. So if there was ever a situation where there was extremely high water consumption and we believed it was related to a leak or something like that, we could still put a restrictor onto those properties.
Sorry, in response to that, I don't want to cut you off this one now. In response to that, sorry, Joel, I'll set it up. If people are using high amounts of water, is there a curve in the way that they are billed, or that billing doesn't change depending on how much water is being used or not?
Generally, if it's a leak base and they get it fixed straight away, they get a 50% remission. When we put the water meters in and they fixed it straight away, there was 100% remission, but that's now passed. No, it's per litre.
A couple of questions, and meter billing's the last one I'll have. So this is about our consent and our abstraction levels. We get that in managing it. And help me, sorry, I don't understand this entirely, but do the rates that are paid on the trickle-fed rural properties, are they less than what is charged for the urban water rate connection? Sorry.
We would have to check that
Yeah,
one out.
Okay, that would be something that would be interesting to know in this scenario. Councillor Jennings is just going to have a quick look. I can see that. And you talked about you'd making some improvements to the metering billing, and I know as a person who gets a water bill that there can be months in between each bill. Is that something that's going to be more regular so that people are it's not coming as a big surprise?
Yeah, we are in the process of this weekend putting our gateway meter recorders into our trucks, into our curbside recycling trucks. So the meters will be read every 14 days now. And so we already have that trialling, and so which has been hugely successful. But after this weekend, and then once we've set it all up, which is just about there, we will be no leak will be greater than 14 days.
And so the last bit that I want to say as a councillor is that we spend a lot of time around bylaws and then around hearings and things, and it strikes me as concerning, I guess, that we have bylaws that we just have no enforcement of, and it feels like it makes a mockery of all of their work. So I'd like to, consider that if we have bylaws, that they're enforced.
Just lastly from me, I would at this stage be supporting option A, but I did want to come on to say that this isn't a rural versus urban problem. This is a water problem that was brought to us for our feedback. I don't want people that could be watching online thinking everyone in Levin is against everybody from Waipihu. It's not that. We weren't aware of this problem until today. So just putting that out there. And also with the suggestion of a potential opt-out, just for future proofing, that if those farms or rural properties wanted to do that and then it came to the sale of their house, or God forbid a fire at their house and they didn't have sufficient water, that is not brought back to this council and being told that we didn't provide them with the necessity that they needed. So yeah, but where's it going to plug into? Your mate that's got the restrictor. So I just wanted to make sure that it doesn't, people watching online don't think that those of us that live in Levin or that we're against everybody else in rural. Sure.
Yeah, I acknowledge that, Nina. Some of the sentiment today, to be honest, it makes it hard to believe. But Rob, true or false, there is a graduated pricing approach in Vauxhall Beach. So the more you use, the curve does go like that.
True.
Yeah. True or false, that the 1,000 litre restrictors that we have in place at the moment are aligned to the pricing approach that we have for water.
True.
So, and then true or false, there is an ability to install restrictors that have a higher litre quantity, but we could still retain the pricing approach that's currently in place.
True, yeah, you can get restrictors in a large number of sizes.
Thank you. Hey, look, mindful of time. Look, it's 12 o'clock. I'm getting the feeling that you've probably heard some varying views. Have you got enough information? Are you adequate information to go away, or do you want further study?
I've probably ending this session thinking that this actually needs to go to a council meeting.
Yeah, fecal.
For a decision. Essentially, we didn't think so because we already have laws and things in place, and we were looking for a preferred outlay. But we could walk away today and set up an operating plan for around option A, but I'm not sure we've landed there.
I think that's a good summary. And I think to be fair and put it in the public arena, I guess there's the options like Mike wanted to explore, and from an operational point of view, what does that look like? There's obviously implications and costs associated with that. So yeah, I guess we hand it over and bring it back in that forum. But thanks very much for your time and effort around this.
Thank you to everyone.
Cool. We've got lunch. You've now only got 20 just finishing off. But that's sort of no reason we can't make a start anyhow. We'll hand you over to Lisa, and I guess this is just an update on where we're at with Plan Change 6A, and I suppose the implications of that from Minister Bishop's letter that's recently been received. So yeah, thanks very much. We've got a few people that are going to be a little bit late back, but yeah, we'll make a start anyway. Thanks, Lisa.
Kia ora koutou. So this briefing is to advise on the outcome and implications of our recent application for Plan Stop exemption for Plan Change 6A. Just a bit of background. Purpose obviously of the presentation is just to give an update on our next steps. And we're in the no and C part of the triangle for this. So this is just a bit of background, mainly to assist the newer councillors who haven't been as entrenched in this work as some of us have. So we have an application that was made by Kāinga Order for Plan Change 6A, which relates to the land at the end of Ryder Crescent and Kawea Road. This is the structure plan, which basically sets out where the major features of the plan change would be if the plan change is granted. So we have a main road between Ryder Crescent and Barry Curtis Place, and some green spaces and stormwater ponds. There are the main features. The yellow overlay is residential land, and that purple dot there is where the local business zone or local business area would be. It's not a zone, it's an overlay. So that's essentially what the plan change looks like. And at the moment it's there's 5 different owners. And basically that's how the various land holdings are set out. The light green one there is the Kāinga Order block. The other ones are private owners. So just a brief history is that the land was rezoned and it was first identified for rezoning in 2008 under the Horowhenua Development Plan, and it was rezoned under Plan Change 21 in 2009, becoming operative in June 2014. It has a residential deferred zoning, which replaced the original rural zone. The zoning was deferred because there wasn't the required infrastructure in place to make it full residential at that point. And the growth area has been carried over into the 2000 Horowhenua Growth Strategy 2040, which was adopted in November 2018 and carried through into the May 2022 update. And so, I don't know, looking at the top, essentially the northernmost light green growth area there is LN1 in that map. And that light green overlay basically says that it's a residential upzoning because it has a deferred residential zoning at the moment. It's not rural zone, it's a deferred residential zone. Which obviously we've just gone to that point now. So it's an upzoning, and the site does contain versatile soils, which is what this layer shows you here. The hatched area are versatile soils, but because the site is a residential zone and has that is identified for growth within 10 years, it is exempt from the NPS HPL, which is the National Policy Statement for Highly Productive Land, which would usually cause us to look further into highly productive land for a rezoning. There we go. This is just a quick summary of the plan change process with some extra bits added because we're in a special situation here. So essentially we had got up to, council had adopted the plan change from the original applicants Kāinga Order and the others. It's been notified for submissions, and then we had a round of further submissions. And while the plan change was out for further submissions, we got news that the government had put the Plan Stop Edict into place. So essentially all council plan changes, which included this one because it had been adopted, were to stop and be withdrawn unless a plan stop exemption was granted. So that's those 2 new orange steps there. We have been granted that exemption, or partial granting, and so we can now continue with the process. The next option for public input will be at the hearing. It's likely that we will look to have a panel of commissioners in this case because we don't have sufficient councillors with the Making Good Decisions qualification, and so the decision making will be it will be there. The panel will make the decision on behalf of council. So if council, when the decision comes through, if there's any issues with the decision, we can go back to the panel with more questions, but we don't really have the option to decline their decision because it's made on behalf of council. It's delegated down to them. So it's just an important point to make there, which is that second diamond. Yeah. So we have received our decision on plan change exemption, which we received on the 13th of March. What this meant was that the plan change is able to continue, but we needed to withdraw 1 rule, 3 policies and 6 permitted activity conditions. This was notified to the public on the 26th of March last Thursday, which was within the required 10-day working period. What it doesn't mean, and we've seen it out in the media a little bit, the plan stop exemption does not mean the government has granted the plan change. It's quite an important distinction to make. Basically, they've just said that we can carry on with the process. The government hasn't granted anything. We'll go through the decision shortly, but just I wanted to go through the cascaded provisions in the district plan and essentially what they've meant. I've tried to use examples from the plan change here. So at the top we have our objectives, and our objectives set out essentially what we want to do. And an objective here is this Restrictors Precinct 2804. And then coming down from the objectives, we have our policies, and the policies essentially set out how we're going to do things or how we want things to occur. And a policy would be Restrictors P39. And then we have our rules, which is how we actually give effect to the objectives and policies, and what these are basically the parts of the district plan that people are required to meet. And so we have Rule R4, which is a subdivision, sub R4, which is a subdivision rule, and in that subdivision we have some performance standards around tikanga during earthworks and stormwater. So in this case, we've been required to remove some policies. So basically that cascade will now look like this. So you can see that we still have our intended objective, and we have our rule, but we're missing the policy. So the structure's still essentially there. It's just a bit clunkier. It's not quite as, doesn't flow quite as well. The rule that we're required to withdraw is a permitted activity rule for state integrated schools. Essentially, listed schools would be permitted in the zone. It doesn't particularly have too much effect because there are no listed schools in the zone. This is essentially just a carryover from general provisions, so not too much of an effect here. We have the 3 policies that we're required to withdraw, that we have been required to withdraw, which are Restrictors P29, Restrictors P39 and Restrictors P49, and they do all relate to Mōpoko and iwi aspirations. And then we have the permitted activity conditions, which essentially sit in 2 sets. We've got the amenity standards, which relate to landscaping, glazing and attached garages. So those have gone now. It's not to say that people couldn't meet these standards, but it would be voluntary now. There's no ability for council to require resource consent or to ensure compliance. And then the other provisions, we'll just skip to the straight to this one, 3 relating to the local retail area. So this one's a bit of an unusual one. They've taken out the local retail standards from the plan change. So these specific standards around local retail will go, and just the normal residential standards will prevail, which essentially these might have made local retail a little bit easier in this zone. So it's not to say that local retail can't occur, it just means that if they don't want to meet residential setbacks or heights or signage provisions, that they would need to get a resource consent. So essentially we are where those provisions sit. Are there any questions arising from the report or this?
Just replay what you said. So essentially, if I was wanting to operate a dairy within this new zone, then this provision says I don't have it of right, but I could then work through a separate resource consent perspective to have that dairy or such like approved at that point in time. Not that sort of activity is prohibited in that residential area.
The general rule and standards that allow the local retail to be in that area are still there. It's just these specific standards relating to local retail have gone. So the process from here, we have arranged for the Plan Change 6A provisions to be updated, and we're just working on getting those uploaded to the e-plan page. There's just some minor background issues to work through with how they look on the page. We are collating the plan change information ready to inform the council officers' evidence for the future hearing, and we will look to appoint hearing commissioners, accredited hearing commissioners, and set the hearing date. And that hearing will be the opportunity for submitters to make their points and the applicant get to respond on that day. We have there was also the question around legal advice. We're aware that Hutt City had a similar situation where they had their whole proposed plan had been notified and out for submissions, and then when they've gone for plan stop, they've actually withdrawn some of the provisions. So their advice from their legal experts has been that those withdrawn provisions, there won't be a hearing for those submitters to attend. So we can we have the option to just take that same tack, is that where the provision has been withdrawn, it basically ceases to exist, and there is no point for the submitters to speak to, but there is still the option to get legal advice. There we go. That's essentially that. Is there any questions?
Could you just thank you for the presentation. Just talk in a bit more detail to the Mopoko values. You in the pre-reading you say that they can still be met in some way. Can you just talk about how that process would happen?
So essentially, yeah, we'd set it out in the pre-reading. Most of these requirements can be met through other means or just on a voluntary basis by the developers, but things like accidental discovery, which is when if you were doing earthworks and you happen to come across human remains or archaeological material, you're actually required anyway under it's the Heritage New Zealand Pohiri Taonga Act to stop work and notify police, iwi representatives, and there is one other, I think, and that you're required to do, but there is a process set out under that act, and it's a legal requirement that if you find human remains or archaeological materials that you have to stop work and protect the site until it's been cleared for work to commence or work gets moved to another place. Tikanga Protocol is protected through some of the performance standards that we have that remain in the plan. But the things like using gifted names, there won't be a requirement or a policy direction in the plan change for that, but that can still be done on a voluntary basis by the developers. And I understand that there's been a close working relationship with Mopoko in the development of the plan change, so I expect that would continue throughout. Engaging with iwi tends to happen anyway as a matter of course, again throughout these large projects, and they have been involved in the project, and when it comes to designing the public open spaces, yeah, I guess that would be again on a voluntary basis with the developers and with Mopoko if they were wanting to have input into that. most of these policies actually do reflect what's already in Tara Ika. It's just that, they won't appear in this new rezoned part of the plan. But yeah, essentially there are sort of some backstops already, which I went through more in the background report, and through the objectives already have sort of there's a direction to do these things anyway. So because the objectives remain still there, and the either the rules or the performance standards, there is some backstop there. Some won't be, some provisions aren't repeated in those, so they will become voluntary. That's essentially where it sits.
I guess it's just me trying to understand what has been lost through the process, because we know through the original process that the values and so on were very much locked in and expressed not only as values but in what those values look like in the plan. And Mo'opoko's letter of protest suggested that from their point of view, the second way of working with them would contain real risks of not realising the same connection with Mo'opoko. So I guess I'm trying to understand what the risks are around their voice not being recognised as fully, and I don't know whether it's a fair question to ask you, Lisa, but it's trying to understand the real difference from the subsequent intervention by the Minister.
No, it is still okay. I think there are actually two separate entities involved, if I'm understanding correctly, that the recent letter was from Tamarangi Hapu, is it? Or a representative of that, or but yeah, regardless, I mean, there has been a loss of some of the provisions, and I guess the implications of that will sort of become apparent as we sort of work through it. We are still, but my understanding was there was a good working relationship between the developers and Mo'opoko at this point, so I expect that would continue. We have actually front-footed it. When we got the letter, we did go down and meet with Mo'opoko directly to explain that we'd had the decision and what it might mean. But again, we are still sort of working through what it means. It's only been a couple of weeks in real time. Yep.
Kia ora. Thank you for your report. I just wanted to, if you can help clarify that the withdrawal of those requirements that we previously had, the provisions, that they weren't necessarily withdrawn by a decision of this council, that it was actually done by the Minister. There's a lot of miscommunication, misinterpretation that it was this council that decided to remove those provisions from the Plan Change 6A. And while it may refer to, even in the paper, that this only affects Mo'opoko, this would affect any plan change moving forward with any iwi that may have been involved at a point in time until now. So I just wanted to take this opportunity for you to clarify that it wasn't Horowhenua District Council that requested the provision be removed, but clarity that it was a decision by the Minister. Kia ora.
Kia ora. No, so yeah, the application for plan stop exemption certainly didn't ask for any change to any provisions. So this requirement to withdraw provisions has come from the direction from central government.
If I can maybe just further the point, plan stop exemption process, we essentially put the plan change into the Minister's office, and then it goes there, and we don't have any essentially engagement, any input. There's no sort of interviews, questions, or seeking clarification until we get that decision back, essentially. So it all happens without any council input once it's gone to their office for consideration. And so, yes, first prize for us would have been that it came out in the same form it went in. But obviously on this occasion, the government or the ministers looked at that and seen some provisions which feel sort of might hinder some of the development opportunity, or slow down, or go against some of their approach, and so it's chosen to take those out, and then we're left to then advance what's left, essentially. Cool. Hey, is there any more questions or discussion? Brilliant. Thank you. Well done. Hey, look, that sort of brings us to concluding this part of the session. Clint's obviously, Councillor Grimstone, sorry, he's obviously got his hearing and regulatory committee meeting, but other than that, and other than Alan's 10 press-ups, we're sort of at the end. Oh, and Kara here to close things. I don't even know.
All together now.
Cool, thank you.
And I'll be using the council car on Wednesday next week in the morning to go up to Palmerston North for